Good afternoon. My name is Stijn Alsteens. I'm a curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints, and with my colleague Freyda Spira, I welcome you all to this Sunday at the Met. Today's program is dedicated to an exhibition which opened a few weeks ago and will be on view until the 2nd of September, called Dürer and Beyond Central European Drawings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which you'll find on the museum's second floor in between the great stairs and the galleries, our galleries of 19th century painting. With the exhibition, our aim with the exhibition was to present, and I think this was a first, at least in this country, to present a balanced overview of the art of drawing in Central Europe, in what at the time was called the Holy Roman Empire, a loosely knit state which coincides more or less precisely with present-day Germany, Hungary, Austria, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, and Poland. We present in the exhibition, the exhibition opens with two of the earliest preserved drawings in the entire world from this region, drawings from the medieval workshops in Prague, and then goes on to show a strong group of drawings by the artist who's undoubtedly the greatest artist ever produced by Germany, Albrecht Dürer. You see one of the star drawing in the exhibition, and frankly one of the best drawings in the museum's collection, Dürer's self-portrait of 1493, here seen as a detail on the cover of our catalogue. But beyond the early 16th century, we wanted to show with the exhibition that there is more to German drawings in the mid and the later 16th century and in the 17th century, periods which even in Germany have been greatly neglected. Another reason why we wanted to bring this overview to the museum was because we wanted to highlight the museum's effort in the last 20 years to bring together a balanced collection. The museum had, before the creation in 1960 of a separate Department of Drawings, and before the merging in 1993 of the Department of Prints and the Department of Drawings, the museum had not really systematically collected Central European drawings. In 1906, which is the first year in which the museum acquired a drawing, the museum acquired this drawing to the left by the great contemporary of Dürer, Albrecht Dürer. And much later, in 1950, we acquired this drawing by Wolf Huber, both very important early 16th century drawings, which were not bought, since the department didn't exist yet, not bought by the Department of Drawings, but were bought by the Department of Paintings, which until 1960 was mainly in charge of acquiring drawings for the museum. Another department with an interest in drawings was the Department of Prints, created in the early 20th century, and especially interested in drawings for prints, preparatory drawings for prints, like this drawing here seen to the left by Heinrich Aldegrever, who worked in a style reflecting the influence of Dürer. You see the drawing here, acquired in 1950, together with the print made after it by Aldegrever himself. The Department of Prints was also interested in an often very much neglected kind of drawing, ornament drawings, and this drawing, about which Freyda Spira will talk later today, is an example of such an ornament drawing, a drawing made not by a painter or a professional draftsman, but by someone, a craftsman, in this case, someone who was planning to make a chandelier. This drawing, as I said, was also acquired by the Department of Prints. Other departments also were interested in drawings, and one of these departments is the Department of Arms and Armor, and we present in the exhibition this beautiful album. You see one page here, but it's quite a voluminous album, an album illustrating the fanciful processions and jousts in late 16th century Nuremberg. Finally, the museum, before we started collecting German drawings more systematically, the museum acquired a small but absolutely wonderful group of German drawings, including the Dürer self-portrait I already mentioned, in 1975, when the banker and great collector Robert Lehman bequeathed his collection to the museum. And among the many highlights from that collection are this drawing here seen to the left by Martin Schongauer, one of the great 15th century German artists, and to the right another drawing by Dürer as the self-portrait, an early drawing. All this entire group of German drawings acquired before the 90s brought to the museum a strong representation of early 16th century art. For the later 16th century and the 17th century, the museum had very little until the mid-90s when we started focusing more on acquiring northern drawings. And you will see in the exhibition, which brings together 100 highlights from the collection, that no less than 75 of them have been acquired in the last 15 to 20 years. This means that when in 1982, 1983, when a seminal exhibition was organized under the title Drawings from the Holy Roman Empire, 1540 to 1680, I'm showing here the cover of the catalog. When this exhibition was organized, first at Princeton University and later in Washington and Pittsburgh, very few, only a handful of drawings from the museum's collection were included. All other drawings came from other North American collections. And what we really wanted to do with the exhibition was to show how much stronger the collection has become in recent years. The curator of the 1982-1983 exhibition in Princeton and the author of its catalog is the first speaker of today. Thomas DaCosta Kaufmann is professor of arts and architecture at Princeton University, and as such, he has more than anyone else in this country and in Europe done to promote the study of Central European art of the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. He has published extensively on the subject, not only in this exhibition catalog, but in many other books and articles. And he has also, and that is probably not less important, formed many students with a special interest in the period and the time. We are very honored that Professor Kaufmann agreed to speak today.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind introduction. Well, the exhibition, Dürer and Beyond, that you may now enjoy upstairs, as you may understand now, is to my mind a real art historical event, notably because it includes so many good drawings from the period after the death of Dürer in 1528. And let me begin with expounding on the anecdote that Dr. Alsteens laid out for you. As he correctly remarked, when I was looking for material to put in the exhibition drawings from the Holy Roman Empire, of which you've just seen the cover for the catalog, I could only find here in the museum 3 drawings that I thought were worth exhibiting. After studying collections that you've heard were at that time dispersed in Arms and Armor, the separated departments of drawings and prints, I could only find very little that came from the period after Dürer's death, and that which you might regard as the flowering of the Baroque around 1700. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, like many other institutions in this country, had simply not been interested in collecting works of art, one might say of any sort, from this period and this region. And indeed, it's a testimony to the changes in taste, scholarship, and most important, collecting patterns that the museum, particularly in the past 2 decades, has, if you've heard, acquired several hundred drawings from Central Europe, so that it can even do without 2 of the German drawings that were exhibited in 1982-3, and even exclude others for various reasons. You may now, moreover, be able to see upstairs an exhibition that has 100 entries, whereas after I'd scoured through all of the public and private collections that I knew about at the time in the United States and Canada, and to which I could gain access, in 1982 I was able to assemble an exhibition that contained only 88 drawings. Now, in this brief lecture, I'd like to outline some of the reasons for the previous situation that existed in scholarship and collecting and connoisseurship that I believe may account for the relative lack of interest in the period that in the title of today's lecture I've called Beyond Dürer. I'd then like to trace the subsequent history of changes in collecting that have led to the possibility of mounting the exhibition that you can currently enjoy. Now, the title Beyond Dürer expresses the main issue. The words Beyond Dürer obviously play upon the title of the Metropolitan exhibition, Dürer and Beyond. However, I want to suggest something more than a mere concern with the era after Dürer's death and before 1700. I believe that we must literally look beyond Dürer in order to appreciate drawings from Central Europe, meaning, as you've heard, Germany and the lands around it, from the mid and later 16th century and from the 17th. Now, as you've heard, Dürer is and has long been the canonical German artist. He remains the greatest German artist for many people, both scholars and lay people, whether or not we personally agree with this evaluation. And from his own time, works by Dürer, including drawings, have been highly valued in collecting. For example, some of the drawings, you've already seen two of them on the screen, here's a third on the right, that are in the exhibition, were probably owned by important 16th century collectors, such as the Nuremberg patricians Imhoff Braun, and subsequently by the greatest collector of the age, Rudolf II. Before many European drawings of any kind entered the Metropolitan Museum, Dürer was in fact already here. The first drawing by Dürer to enter this museum was acquired in 1919, and it's really one of the earliest drawings owned by the Metropolitan. Even though only a few drawings by artists active in Central Europe from any time could be found in this building until the mid-1990s, as you've just heard, already by the mid-1970s, with the acquisition of the Lehman collection, the Metropolitan already had a major group of sheets by Dürer. And this includes the great self-portrait of the youthful artist, showing him together with a study of pillows, and there are more pillows on the verso. And this is rightly regarded as one of the Metropolitan Museum's most famous drawings, and it's sometimes seen as a parallel to the other most famous drawing in the collection, and that's the drawing by Michelangelo on the right of the Livian Sibyl, a design, of course, for the Sistine Chapel. But Dürer's greatness, real or supposed, has overshadowed many other artists and even whole time periods of art in Central Europe. A bibliography that was compiled on the occasion of the 500th anniversary of Dürer's death in 1971 amassed 7,000 titles. In comparison, a selective biography for all the arts in all the countries of Central Europe for the period 1550-1620 that was published in 1988 and revised in 2003 came up with only a fraction of this total, or at least that's all we put into it. Not just the appreciation of Dürer, but what he and his contemporaries have stood for has far overshadowed, and I would argue even long impeded, consideration of later works from Central Europe, including drawings. For this reason, I think you may never have even heard some of the names of the artists, or maybe even many of the names of the artists now shown on the walls here. Now, the valuation of Dürer does not just stem, I think, from his perceived greatness, but has very much to do with various tendencies, intellectual or even ideological, that have affected taste and scholarship. Public museums, for instance, in Europe and the United States, including this one, were founded in the 19th century, more precisely here, 1870, 71. Their growth was linked with private collecting, which was formed, indeed, with museums in mind. The 19th century, however, here, one can say, and also in general in Europe, was the time in which art history became a discipline that was taught in universities, in this country beginning with a department at Princeton in 1882. But the 19th century and the early 20th century, when art history departments and public museums both began to flourish, was also, as you know, an age of nationalism. Many nation states, including Germany, came into being in their modern form at this time. Germany and Italy, for instance, in the very years that the Metropolitan and the Boston Museum of Fine Art were founded, namely 1870-71. Art and its history were used to serve the interests of nationalist ideologies down through the Second World War until 1945 and even beyond. And thinking about art often followed or shaped presuppositions about nations at the time. And in this way of thinking, Dürer really could stand against Michelangelo. In the first place, this view relates to issues of periodization. If Italy had a Renaissance that was represented by Michelangelo and Leonardo and Raphael, for Germany also had to have its own Renaissance that occurred at the same time, the early 16th century, and could boast of artists of comparable magnitude. And this is the way, for instance, the famed art historian Heinrich Wölfflin treated Dürer as an exemplar of the German feeling for form, which Wölfflin contrasted with Italy. Dürer's contemporaries, like Albrecht Dürer, could also be taken into account in similar fashion. And I think that this is why this drawing, one of the reasons why this drawing, which you've seen a few moments ago, was acquired here by Roger Fry, the famous British critic and contemporary of Wölfflin, in 1906, one of the first objects Fry bought when he was working as curator in the Department of Paintings in this building. However, the idea that Dürer and his age, artists like Altdorfer, epitomize the Renaissance as an age of German greatness, entails with it a related notion that specifically downgrades art that comes afterwards. Art after Dürer was thought to have represented a decline. And this, I think, also results from the fact that until really the 20th century, and really from 1920 on, no aesthetic criteria yet existed by which later art could be redeemed or reevaluated by regarding them as forms of what we call Mannerist art or the early Baroque. But there's something more to this story. Dürer became not only the greatest German art, but the epitome of German art and all that was great in it at any time. He and his contemporaries stood for this ideal in German scholarship and in public opinion up to and beyond the Second World War. Most notoriously, in popular writing, Dürer could even be regarded as the leading example for all Germans. Dürer als Führer, Dürer as Führer, is the title of a book by Julius Langbein, which was published in 1928. Now, the title of this book resonates loudly. Adolf Hitler, the German Führer who was elected chancellor and then seized power in Germany in 1933, esteemed Dürer above all other artists. Drawings by Dürer from Lwów, formerly in Poland, now Lviv in Ukraine, including the self-portrait and two or three of the other drawings you've seen, which are now in the Metropolitan, were requisitioned for Hitler and reportedly often sat on his desk, and Hitler carried them on campaigns. The notorious portrait you see here by Lanzinger, Hubert Lanzinger, which was shown at the so-called Great German Art Exhibition of 1938 in Munich, depicted Hitler in the guise, as you see, of Dürer's knight in the so-called Night, Death, and the Devil. In Hitler's Third Reich, Dürer and his imagery stood for what was great in the Nazis' eyes about Germany. Now, this is, of course, an aberrant view of the artist, to say the least. Among other things, Dürer may originally have been Hungarian, his family may have been originally Hungarian and not German. But it helps put the problem of dealing with art in Central Europe in clear, if rather stark, perspective. The idea that Dürer and his age epitomized German greatness entailed the related idea that other kinds of German art did not. And this provides another reason why the art that came after Dürer was regarded as representing a decline. The notion's been stated often openly. It stems, I think, from nationalist prejudices that view art as an expression of national schools. And in a more anodyne form, a more neutral form, it's still traceable in catalogs, mentioned, for example, in some of the the discussion around the current exhibition, including the review in the New York Times on Friday. And it's also expressed in the organization hanging and acquisition policies of many museums. You're familiar with displays, as the one in the painting department upstairs, that are still roughly organized according to periods and national schools. According to the long-lasting view, Dürer stood, therefore, for more than just the German Renaissance. He stands for Germany itself. Now, although Dürer had himself traveled to Italy and reacted to Italian and to ancient art, as can be seen in a drawing not in the show but in the museum. That's the Dürer take on the Apollo Belvedere in the Vatican museums. After Dürer's death, many more artists from Central Europe went abroad and then returned home, and conversely, artists, especially from the Netherlands or even from Italy, came to work in Central Europe, and there's a continuing interchange. Artists who'd been more strongly affected by Italian or Netherlandish art than even Dürer himself became major figures in later periods. One of them, whom you can see in the exhibition, is Joachim von Sandrart, who worked in both the Low Countries and Italy, or, for instance, Joseph Heinz, who came from Switzerland, and as you see here, is approximating the works, for instance, of people like Correggio or Barocci. Or Jacob Weyer from Hamburg, who is resembling, in a certain way, a Dutch art here. The heads of the local school at the court of Munich, and you see here Friedrich Sustris on the left and Peter Candid on the right, which are so called after his Italianized name, but he's properly Peter de Witte, were both of Netherlandish origins, or birth, in the instance of the painter and draftsman on the right, but they'd been schooled and were active in Italy. Their art, and the art of many similar artists like them, was therefore to be regarded at best in the past as hybrid, and hybrids were hardly valued by a racially inspired or even a more neutrally nationalistic aesthetic. Their art could not compete with or stand for the supposedly pure-blooded national art of Germany. And on similar grounds, German art beyond Dürer was to be regarded as a weak art, one of decline. While Italian and Dutch art could be studied and appreciated on their own, the work of Germanic artists, or artists who worked in Germany, who seemed to imitate Italian or Dutch art, rather than, as one might say, to emulate or respond to it or receive it, would seem at best second-rate. And I think you might have read this on Friday in the Times as well. And that's a sign, I think, that this idea has died hard. Even if there's not much intellectual life left in it, it still walks around. In 1980, a much-admired book on German sculpture could, in fact, openly disparage hybrid art and talk about Italo-Netherlanders. And these are artists like these characters, Sustris and Candid, who worked in Germany. And you may still find echoes of this in discussions of national schools. Needless to say, this has had a huge impact on collecting. There still remain old biases in favor of what can be regarded clearly as French, Italian, Dutch, and Flemish paintings, and drawings as well. And these kinds of attitudes work against things that do not seem purely German. So, for instance, in contrast with the attitudes of the drawings department or the collection of sculpture and decorative arts here, the Metropolitan Museum of Art still lacks any paintings by any artist of the cosmopolitan group who include German, Swiss, French, Italian, and Netherlandish artists, Spranger on the left, Giuseppe Arcimboldo on the right, who worked in Prague around 1600 and who've been celebrated in many exhibitions recently and many publications. While the Department of Princeton Drawings has been assembling a major collection of art from Central Europe, and so has, in a way, the Department of European Sculpture and Decorative Arts, they've increased their holdings. I think only one really major painting has been acquired as opposed to being given by an artist active in Central Europe from the whole period, from Dürer's death to 1800. Although recently, this important picture by Peter Candid has been given to the museum. In any case, the framing of art history or aesthetics according to national terms and the retention of qualifications based on these categories is not appropriate, I think, for the 16th and 17th centuries. Although Nazi Germany absorbed all the lands around it, Central Europe is much larger than Germany. In fact, the modern nation-states of Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium did not exist during the 16th and 17th centuries, nor did national sentiments that led to their formation. Before 1800, the Holy Roman Empire, and here we see it, again, a map of it, occupied the center of Europe, as you've heard. The Holy Roman Empire included, as you can see, not only modern Germany, but Austria, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, parts of Poland, and until 1648, also Switzerland, and the modern Netherlands were there too. They've been sundered off in this view, but they were still part until the Treaties of Westphalia. Belgium, as you note, what's now Belgium, belonged to the empire until its end, until 1806. Substantial areas, as you can note, in eastern France and large swatches of Italy, including the Trentino Alto Adige region, Lombardy, and even Tuscany, also were nominally territories of the empire. For significant periods of time, both towards the beginning of the show, as you've heard in the relation to the Bohemian drawings which were bought here, and even 1600, around 1600, the residence of the emperor, whose portrait by Arcimboldo you see down below, Rudolf II, was in Prague, of which there's a view, a contemporary view up above. And this is, I think, the reason why so many different centers could grow up at different times in Central Europe. It's why, for example, the present exhibition can rightly organize material around multiple centers and not just one, as you might do if you were showing art from France. From the early 17th centuries, these include drawings from Augsburg, such as this sheet by Hans Rottenhammer in the museum. From Nuremberg, you would have this from Wenzel Jamnitzer, or from Rudolphine Prague, a relatively recently acquired drawing by Hans van Aken, which is related to the drawing you saw on the cover of the catalog. And for that reason, the earlier exhibition, Drawings from the Holy Roman Empire, was organized according to similar geographical and historical principles as those that I think are in this exhibition too. Indeed, the name, Drawings from the Holy Roman Empire, was chosen deliberately, and similarly, a second show, to which allusion was made, devoted to the period 1680-1800, had the title Central European Drawings. And this later title has also been followed by many exhibitions, including this one. But much as Central Europe stands for a broad geographical region, the Holy Roman Empire was much more than a national entity. It comprised many nations, peoples, languages, and faith. And in this region, it was therefore, I think, entirely natural for artists who'd been born in different lands to move back and forth and to settle in one place or another, or for that matter, Protestants to design Catholic works of art, as Sandart did in an example in this exhibition. The situation seems similar, of course, to what we may experience in our present lives in the United States and in many other places, when patterns of immigration and movement mean that people from many different places may mix and mingle, sharing their cultures in many centers all over the globe. Thinking historically, it, I think, entirely justifies the exhibition's inclusions of drawings by artists such as Friedrich Schuster's, whom you see here now, who were born in Italy of Netherlandish stock, or Peter Candid, who was born in, seems not to be advancing, here we go, Peter Candid, who was Netherlandish, but trained in Italy. Since they worked later in Germany and the Empire in Bavaria, as well, I think, as the implicit recognition that these are worthwhile artists. And for similar reasons, I think we might have also included Bartholomeus Spranger, the Antwerp-born artist, and someone from the Empire, but a Netherlander who'd worked in Italy before settling in Prague, where he was the major artist and the longest-serving painter for Rudolf II. And indeed, the Metropolitan does own several important drawings by him, such as this recently acquired sheet representing Diana and Actaeon, and I think this may be reserved for a future exhibition, and that's maybe one reason why it's not in the show now. The growth of collections of drawings as well as paintings in American museums, however, follows patterns that seem to be not much different, although for different reasons, obviously, different things are going on here, than those that also determine the neglect of the period in Europe. There wasn't much interest in this later period. In this context, the acquisition during the 19th and earlier 20th centuries by Americans of works representing the period after Dürer almost seems to have happened by accident. Now, earlier American collectors, private collectors, did buy some later Central European drawings, but these mainly came from the period after 1700. And it's only by chance that some drawings of the later 16th and 17th centuries entered American private collections during earlier times. And this, I think, certainly applies to the sheet you now see on the screen, which is probably the first such drawing to come to this side of the Atlantic. This is the very first sheet to come to the United States by an artist active and exhibited in the current exhibition. It's a work by Friedrich Sustris. This drawing was part of the initial bequest of James Bowdoin to the college that bears his name, Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. It probably comes from the collection of the British artist John Smibert, who is the teacher of the famed Anglo-American painter John Singleton Copley. Smibert settled in Boston in 1728 after he'd been engaged by Bishop Berkeley in his effort to found a college in Bermuda, and the books and the money went to Yale instead of going to Bermuda. Smibert traveled, however, in Italy, where he apparently acquired many of his drawings, and he very well, I think he probably did buy this drawing there, perhaps even in Florence. He may well have regarded it as a Florentine drawing, even though it was done by Sustris, I believe, later in Bavaria. And that is, of course, because, as you can see upstairs in the museum, Sustris had worked with Giorgio Vasari in Florence, working for the Grand Duke, where, among other things, he did this drawing illustrating Florentine history for a tapestry design. It's possible, I think, that one of the other drawings from Bavaria that entered an American collection at an early date was acquired for a similar reason. And this is a drawing by Peter Candid that is preparatory for a painting of Venus and Aeneas, now in Europe. The drawing here, which is now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, was acquired by the Philadelphia collector John S. Phillips for his collection, and Phillips bequeathed it to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. In this drawing, Candid might well have seemed to be a Florentine, even to a trained eye in the 19th century. Candid was a member of the Florentine Academy, and he'd also worked in Tuscany for a long time. Elsewhere, in Boston, during the 1840s and 1850s, John Whit Randall assembled a large collection of drawings, which his sister later donated to Harvard. But inasmuch as it contained German drawings, these date largely to the 19th century or the late 18th century, with a few exceptions, and thus may be considered almost contemporary with the collector himself, who was active from the 1830s onward. The only significant earlier drawing I was able to find in the Randall collection at Harvard is this sheet, which I exhibited, is by Gabriel Valla from Nuremberg. The most important collection of drawings from Central Europe established in the United States until the late 20th century certainly came here by chance. And this is the collection, surprisingly, which is in Sacramento, California, where it belongs to the Crocker Art Museum. Judge E.B. Crocker was one of the early railroad tycoons, and he's the eventual founder of the museum. Like many other Americans of his time, or his wife is, he wanted to take a grand tour of Europe, but he chose the rather inauspicious years to do it of 1870. He could not visit France, and certainly not Paris, because the Franco-Prussian War was going on, and then the Commune of Paris, and there was a siege of Paris. He could also not go very easily to Rome. There was conflict in Rome when the city was incorporated into the Kingdom of Italy. So he went to Germany, and he settled in Saxony for a while and lived in Dresden. He seems to have bought many of the 1,200 old master drawings he acquired before his return in 1871, when he came back to California, from the Leipzig dealer Rudolf Weigel and from C.G. Berner in Dusseldorf. It might seem that he had a preference for German drawings. Certainly, it's through Crocker's acquisition, probably in Germany, that the first authentic Dürer drawing, and that's the drawing you see on the screen, to enter an American collection, came to Sacramento. However, his acquisitions also seem to have resulted from what was available to him there at the time. Study of the Weigel catalogs indicates that Crocker seems to have bought up what had not been sold at auction previously and remained in stock. He seemed to have acquired rather much en gros without much distinction, and I even have the impression, if I might say, that the drawings may have been thrown in part along with the paintings that he also bought, the contemporary German paintings of the late 19th century, to sweeten the deal, as it were. In any case, it's from this source that important drawings by artists that the Metropolitan has also desired to acquire, figures who would have been little known, however, even in Germany at this time, came to this side of the Atlantic. These include not only this great drawing by Dürer, but also the best drawing by Hermann Weyer in the United States. You can see one upstairs as well. And three important drawings by the most important Bohemian artists of the 17th century, Karol Freyda. This is one for a painting. Other important drawings by artists active in Central Europe were among the 10,000 sheets that William F.E. Gurley, collected between 1906 and 1916. And these were given eventually as a memorial to him after his death to the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, the Gurley collection includes important drawings by figures such as Hans Friedrich Schorr from the period after Dürer. And this is one of the drawings from Chicago. But it seems to me quite understandable that in a collection of this size, several major artists would enter an American collection. There are really, as many as 13,000 drawings here. There does not seem, I believe, much of a particular intention to collect in this area. The point of the matter is that drawings in this collection languished unobserved and unidentified until a few scholars were actually brought into Chicago to study them, to look through all of them, from about 1980. And many drawings of note in Chicago have still not been published, particularly the ones from Central Europe. Now, I can relate another anecdote that I think shows some of the disregard with which drawings that had earlier been collected were treated. The Randall collections were not available for study at Harvard through the 1970s. It was only until Konrad Oberhuber, more in a minute, found many of them in boxes in the late 1970s and 1980s that they were made more available, and they'd been put in boxes largely to be deaccessioned, to be sold by Harvard. Fortunately, Oberhuber rescued them, but he was too late to rescue other Mannerist drawings, including a nude by the major Dutch Mannerist Goltzius that's now in the Morgan Library. It comes from Harvard, although it's not recognized at the Morgan, and its sale was used to buy a drawing by the French artist François Boucher. Now, this sort of treatment, I think, exemplifies the slight esteem with which Central European drawings after the period of Dürer, and even Mannerist drawings, which is a more large category, were treated even by distinguished and learned curators in the United States. The American canon of European drawings for the 16th century simply did not include any later German drawings. And here it followed the European trajectory. Comprehensive exhibitions of European drawings with very many good sheets were held in this country in 1935 and 1949 and 1959, but they did not include a single German drawing of the period after 1525 or before 1700. And even as late as 1975, this case still remained, and an otherwise well-informed scholar could say about later 16th century drawing, in the face of the mass of contradictory evidence that you find upstairs, and I quote, that Germany did not have an important period of Mannerist art, and in claim also that in the 17th century the development of art and culture in Germany was arrested. Now, this attitude, I think, seems to have little to do with the two world wars, because Dürer was always esteemed, and the greatest monograph on the artist, a book by Erwin Panofsky, was in fact even published here in Princeton during the course of the Second World War. But Panofsky and other German scholars who came to the United States shared common opinions. They also looked past or ignored art of the 16th and 17th century in Central Europe. Now, there are two exceptions to this. One is Julius Held, who was a longtime professor at Columbia, who owns several strong drawings, such as this fine portrait of the Italo-Netherlandish sculptor John Bologna by Joseph Heinz. And this is a drawing that Held sold to the National Gallery of Art. But even Professor Held spoke apologetically of his interest, which may have also developed because works by Heinz are what a scholar in the United States could afford. They were relatively unknown and thus within his purchasing power. The other main exception was the Austrian scholar, William Sweda, who owned this drawing. Sweda had been a curator in Graz in Austria, and his collection passed through his daughter and son-in-law, Bettina Sweda and Robert Manning of New York, to the University of Texas, where Mr. Manning had gone. The Mannings were a very shy but hospitable host, and I was quite happy to be allowed to see on a number of occasions at least parts of their collection, which was then in Forest Hills, and to borrow drawings from them for both of the exhibitions of Central European drawings I organized. However, I still think it's a sign of the rather limited regard with which the Mannings held these sheets in comparison with others, that they kept them loose and unmatted in a metal suitcase, although Mr. Manning himself identified the drawing here by the Dresden goldsmith Johann Kellerthaler, so he certainly knew drawings quite well. Many of the other drawings remain to be discovered and attributed. Now, this was the situation that one would face, and I faced, when I expressed an interest in art, for instance, at the court of Rudolf II. I can well recall a professor I had speaking disparagingly in lectures. I was talking about Italian art of Schnitzel and Wurtz, by which he meant art in Central Europe. Even a sympathetic curator at the time could say that it was fine to work in such a wilderness, but one might be so far out of the territory of most art historians where people would go that no one would ever reach this field of interest, find it of interest. Well, since then, of course, as I mentioned, there have been numerous important exhibitions of Rudolphine art in various places, and also it can be said that the same curator was responsible for a small exhibition of the works of Giuseppe Arcimboldo and related Rudolphine objects that was held last year, the year before, in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Already in the 1970s and 1980s, and slightly earlier, there have been some signs of change, however. A number of American professors perspicaciously expressed a broader interest in Central Europe. During the 1950s, Edward Maser already was acquiring works and organizing shows in Kansas that contained works from Central Europe, albeit of a later period, and he brought these interests to Chicago when he became professor at the university there and established the Smart Gallery there. Here in New York, Colin Eisler, who's still teaching at the Institute of Fine Arts across the street, illustrated some drawings of the period in his general pictorial overview of German drawings. And some newer collectors, like the John Steiners, who lived in Larchmont and who themselves were from Austria, began to collect some Central European drawings along with some of the other sheets, such as the Bronzino that's in this museum. And this is a drawing which they gave to Harvard. But most important was a change in attitude and scholarship that began to occur in the 70s. This represented a renewed appreciation for what might be called mannerism outside Italy, and particularly for the School of Prague, and then for other places, for paintings, drawings, architecture, and ultimately drawings. And this includes the period after 1530. In the field of drawings, Heinrich Geissler in Stuttgart in Europe played a major role. Geissler organized a landmark show in Stuttgart in 1979 and inspired me to emulate him in the United States. In this country, I'd single out Konrad Oberhuber as marking a major change. Oberhuber, who unfortunately passed away several years ago, in 1958, when he was only 23, had written a still remarkable dissertation on Bartholomew Spranger, on the court artist, and this started really the modern revival of interest in Rudolphine art. And from 1970, for 3 years, Oberhuber was on loan, as it were, from the great Austrian collection, the Albertina in Vienna, to the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And there, his brief was to assist in the establishment of a new master drawings collections. And while in Washington, Oberhuber understandably bought some of the first drawings from Central Europe from the period to enter the national collection, including sheets attributed to the group around Spranger. From Washington, Oberhuber went to Harvard, where he became curator of drawings and professor at the FOG. At Harvard, he established important relations with a number of major collectors, and through this experience and his years at the National Gallery, he brought or encouraged the gifts of numerous drawings from Central Europe, including encouraging the gift of this object on the screen. He worked and taught at Harvard until 1987, when he returned to become director of the Albertina. Most important, I think, Oberhuber jump-started the collection of later Central European drawings in two major institutions in this country, at Harvard and at the National Gallery. Oberhuber was, in a way, accompanied and certainly followed as chief curator by Andrew Robeson in Washington. And from the mid-1970s, Andrew has eagerly sought after drawings from Central Europe, building up an extensive collection of sheets of high quality that stretches from the 15th to the 20th century. He's long recognized the variety, the different functions and inherent qualities of drawings from this period and era. Most important, he's recognized that the older, nationally determined and chronologically limited prejudices that steered interest away from the period after 1530 were not valid. He supported the exhibition, Drawings from the Holy Roman Empire. He offered critiques of the selection, and he arranged to have it shown in the National Gallery. And through his stewardship, the National Gallery has established a collection of drawings and related miniatures, such as this one by Joris Hoefnagel, that at least rivals that of the Metropolitan Museum in this category. There have been several coups in this regard. The acquisition of the Rosenwald collection, which includes this sheet, the acquisition of the Held collection, the acquisition of the Woodner collection, and most recently the acquisition of a large part of the collection of Wolfgang Ratchen, which includes, among other treasures, one of the few and perhaps the only authentic drawing by the German artist active in Rome, Adam Elsheimer, that's to be found in the United States, and that's what the small drawing you see here. The second major institution to be considered in this regard, though its collections are not so extensive in this area that I think deserves mention, is the Getty Museum. There, George Goldner was at work, but after George came here to the Metropolitan, my own student Lee Hendricks has been curator, and Lee wrote her dissertation on Hoefnagel, on this manuscript, and she's been responsible for bringing other sheets, including this major Hoefnagel manuscript, to the Getty. Now that brings us to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where we can look at this drawing by Rottenhammer. After having been responsible for establishing a collection of masterworks at the Getty, George Goldner came here, as you've heard, in the early 1990s. George saw as his brief a different one than what he'd had to do at the Getty. After the neglect of German and, in general, one might say, Central European art that the museum had showed, he thought that it was important to build up a comprehensive of art from Germany and indeed from elsewhere, including the Low Countries. And I think it's fair to say that collecting works from the 16th and 17th centuries was also, or is also, very much to his taste, since George has always loved Italian Mannerist works of art, and those of you who saw the recent Bronzino exhibition here in this building would know that this is, I think, true. I think he may well have seen similar qualities in the works by artists active in Central Europe, for whose acquisition he, along with Stijn Alsteens and Freyda Spira, have been responsible during the last 2 decades of his tenure here. And you can see the results upstairs, so we may be brief. You can see for yourselves. I think I should just single out this sheet, which is the latest acquisition to make it into the exhibition, a drawing by Rottenhammer, because I think it helps set up a final contrast with which I would like to conclude my talk today. So let me finish with another anecdote. When 30 years ago I was preparing drawings from the Holy Roman Empire, and I brought my graduate students, including Lee Hendricks at the time, into the city to see drawings in a rival New York institution, the chief curator there did not bring the sheets I'd requested by Rottenhammer, although they have 3 very good drawings, or 4 very good drawings, and other artists, such as those whom the Metropolitan Museum has now been eagerly acquiring. She insisted instead that I look at Dürer, whose works were already familiar to me and the students. When I politely asked again to see Rottenhammer, I was angrily told off in front of my class that I wanted to see, and I quote, the rattiest drawings in her collection. I think that her successor would think otherwise, and I hope after looking at this drawing by Rottenhammer and others in the exhibition upstairs, you will do too. And it's gratifying to see the change in attitudes represented by the exhibition here today, which enables us, I hope all of you, to consider freely and I hope openly and revalue, and think what you will, a whole time period and an era whose neglect and more recent recovery in the United States I hope I've been able to trace to you, if only briefly, today. And I thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to wait for the PowerPoint to come up. Good afternoon. I'm Freyda Spira, one of the curators of the exhibition Dürer and Beyond, and I would like to introduce you this afternoon to our trumpeter, who greeted us with such a wonderful fanfare by Bartholomeus Riedel, and to explain to you why we chose to include musical flourishes as part of our program today. Nestled into the final gallery of the exhibition that covers the 17th century is a drawing executed in opaque watercolor with metallic paint over black chalk on vellum. It shows a beautiful and intricate chandelier that could have been made in either brass or carved wood with gilt and would have spanned an impressive 4 feet. This measurement is based on the Nuremberg Schuhe, or foot marker, which you can see here, seen below the chandelier in the drawing. The complex geometric embellishments on the arms of the chandelier, which would reflect and amplify the light of the candles, relates to ideas circulating in Nuremberg during this period about perspective. And here, I'm showing you a page from a popular book about the perspective of regular solids by the goldsmith Wenzel Jamnitzer, which was engraved by Joost Amann. Notably, there is a beautiful preserved copy of this book on display in the Johnson Gallery upstairs, where we put together a selection of Central European prints to complement the drawings exhibition. As geometric elements are similar to the polyhedron seen here on the right, which seems to show the endless penetration of forms. Along the bottom edge of the drawing is an inscription that reads, "This hanging chandelier was made in this manner by Master Isaac trumpet maker in Nuremberg in 1632. Isaac represents the first member of a renowned family of brass instrument makers who were active for 5 generations. This is the only known drawing by and expands our conception of him as a craftsman. A rare example of a trombone by him is in Nuremberg and is signed and dated by him on the bell garland, 1612. I also show you 3 17th century examples of natural trumpets by the renowned Haas, and Heinlein families, who were all active in Nuremberg and part of the city's strong brass-making guild. Here to play his own natural trumpet, which is a modern replica of one by Hans Heinlein, is James Miller, who for 9 seasons played principal trumpet for the San Francisco Opera Orchestra and toured with the Metropolitan Opera. He has chosen to devote his performance energies to cornetto and Baroque trumpet, which he's doing here today at the museum. He will now play Courant, Folio, and Sabard by Johann Heinrich Schmelzer, and he will finish the program today with an excerpt from the Trumpet Shall Sound by Georg Friedrich Handel. Let us welcome back James Miller.
As our second and concluding talk, I am pleased to announce my colleague Marion Ainsworth, who is a curator in the museum's Department of European Paintings. Marion is internationally recognized as one of the leading scholars of early Netherlandish paintings, and as such has organized several successful exhibitions in this museum, most recently in the fall of 2010, the acclaimed retrospective on the early 16th century Netherlandish artist Jan Gossaert. Marion will be talking today about the most elusive kind of drawing, even to curators specializing in drawings, the underdrawing of paintings. Marion.
In the stunning exhibition, Dürer and Beyond, that I hope you've had a chance already to take a look at, there's a considerable variety in the style and function of examples on view. These range from exquisite but simple exercises in draftsmanship, such as you see here by some of the giants of German art, such as Albrecht Dürer, and here, as you've seen now the third time, but you can never get tired of seeing it, Albrecht Dürer's self-portrait and studies with the artist's left hand in a pillow, and the verso of that sheet, which is 6 studies of a pillow, to uncommon and visually striking individual studies, including Hans Baldung Green's Ecstatic Christ, or Urs Graf's Bearer of the Banner of the Swiss Canton Glarus, where the two, banner and man, appear to merge together, or the wonderfully strange and boldly foreshortened view of a man resting on a table by the master A.W. That was squared for transfer to a larger format. In like manner, the underdrawings of paintings also vary to a considerable degree from artist to artist. And here we see Ludwig Schongauer's Christ before Pilate at the left, and a detail of the underdrawing in the figure of, especially the detail of the figure of Christ at the right, and note also the dog down here in the lower left-hand corner, kind of a sleight of hand, now you see him and now you don't. In his famous essay on art and connoisseurship, Max J. Friedlander once characterized the underdrawing or the artist's preliminary sketch on the panel or canvas thus. He said, and I quote, "In the Renaissance period, the drawing is concealed beneath the layer of color. It stands in the same relationship to the painting as the skeleton to the flesh. It is present in the painting as something immanent, just as a painting is immanent in Rembrandt's drawings. The underdrawing is, well, kind of like a roadmap for the artist. In it, he establishes what is necessary as a guide for carrying out the composition in the upper painted layers. Some artists rely only on a summary sketch, while others consider not just the fundamentals of the composition, but go further to describe the volume of forms and also the desired shading of individual elements. Often changes can be observed from the underdrawing to the painted layers. And the rediscovery and capture of the underdrawing through the technique of infrared reflectography has added an enormous amount of helpful visual material to both the study of drawings and paintings. It is true serendipity that the study and the resulting catalog and exhibition of our German drawings collection at the Metropolitan Museum by Stijn, Alsteens, and Freyda Spira has coincided with the study of our early German paintings collection by Joshua Waterman and myself. For the scholarly catalog of the museum's paintings, each one has been brought up to the Paintings Conservation Department and studied with the help of Karen Thomas from the technical point of view, that is, X-radiography, infrared reflectography, microscope examination, and so forth. In many cases, the most revelatory technical documentation comes from using infrared reflectography to uncover the painting's initial sketch on the panel. Occasionally, this underdrawing is possible to see even with the naked eye on the walls of our museum galleries, particularly when the painting is unfinished. In a large work on canvas attributed to Jorg Broy the Younger, of Joseph interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh, the unfinished portions are especially visible in the foreground, where the two dogs and floor tiles are merely sketched in. Another celebrated example in the Met's collection, to which we will return in this discussion, is Albrecht Dürer's Salvator Mundi. Dürer brought the painting up to a finished state in the draperies, but left the head and the hands incomplete, revealing one of the most extraordinarily fully worked up preparatory or underdrawings known. Note especially the drawing of the tight curls of the beard, or the extensive parallel hatching and cross-hatching in the face and here down in the neck with pen. This is why, in fact, this painting is in our German drawings exhibition, to be admired as much for its drawing as for its painting. Sometimes, as in the Hans Suess von Kulmbach's Girl Making a Garland with a Cat Nearby, the underdrawing can be seen visually emerging through the very thin overlying paint layers. This is because certain pigments, such as lead white, become increasingly transparent over time, allowing the underdrawing to be revealed as a pentiment. And I think here, I hope you can see the drawing quite clearly emerging through the overlying painted layer. This tantalizing partial view of the artist's initial sketch on the panel makes us all the more curious to see the greater extent of it in paintings and to consider what function it served for artists. This can be done with the use of infrared reflectography equipment that virtually sees through most of the upper paint layers to reveal the underdrawing beneath. This technology shows the underdrawing image on a monitor screen, and simultaneously it can be documented digitally. In today's lecture, I'd like to show you some examples of the underdrawings we have found in our German paintings and discuss briefly, just as in the case of drawings on paper, the function they served for the painting. Then I will focus in on Albrecht Dürer's Salvator Mundi to consider in greater depth the artist's achievements and aims. We often think of the preparatory drawing on paper as a means to an end, as the vehicle for the artist's primary creative effort. Translating that creative idea onto the panel or canvas in a complete and efficient way was sometimes achieved by artists through techniques for the transfer of design by pouncing and tracing. The diagram at the left shows how designs were transferred by pouncing, first by pricking the drawing here on the contours of the form with a sharp needle or sharp point, and then taking the pounce bag here that's filled with carbon dust and daubing that on top of the pricked cartoon. And the carbon particles then filter through those holes and create then a drawing of dots, basically. It's a connect the dots pattern on the grounded panel. For certain works, the drawing on paper then also served as a cartoon, so that none of the details would be intentionally eliminated. In the drawings exhibition, there's an example by Lucas Cranach the Elder in Workshop, this drawing of St. Catherine, where all of the main contours have been pricked with a needle for pouncing, and I hope you can see these little dots all along here where the drawing has been pricked with a needle. In this case, the pounced drawing was most likely transferred, in fact, to another sheet, which then in turn was used to transfer the drawing to a panel for painting. The prick drawing here is shown again at the left, and an infrared reflectogram of it at the right. So you can do infrared reflectography of drawings as well. And the example then at the right shows that the artist, in fact, first drew a niche behind the figure and columns here, as the initial idea, and then in the drawing, that was covered over by the dark color of the background. Popular compositions of great Flemish masters, such as the Virgin and Child by Dirk Bouts at the left, which is in the National Gallery, London, were admired and copied by many German artists at this time. Although the German painting in the Metropolitan Museum at the right does not copy Bouts's composition exactly, there likely was another Bouts prototype that this artist knew. For the underdrawing of the painting at the right indicates that he used a pattern or a cartoon for the transfer of a pre-existing design. And this is how that was done. This is tracing, where the contours of the initial design were gone over with a stylus, and then with the use of an interleafing carbon-coated paper here, it was transferred, those contours were transferred again onto the grounded panel. So it's through infrared reflectography that we see this kind of very controlled and rigid contour line drawing that indicates to us that it was a transfer of the design from a drawing. Such transfer patterns also served the artist in the production of multiples, that is, in making several paintings from the same drawing. Hans Holbein the Elder typically made sketches of his sitters after life. For example, the beautiful drawing you see here at the left that's in the Queen's collection at Windsor Castle, and then later employed them as cartoons for transferring the details of the sitter's physiognomy to the panel. And at the right you see the corresponding painting in the Met's collection. Just as in the previous example I showed you, the contours of the head and facial features in the drawing were traced, producing the rigid contours of the underdrawing that we see particularly here in the eyes, in the nostrils, and also in the ear. Nothing at all freehand. In certain cases, as here, the drawing shows the highly refined handling and execution of Holbein, but the painting, unfortunately, does not. This indicates the participation of a workshop assistant who, in this situation, carried out a commission when the sitter perhaps could not afford the price of Holbein's participation at every stage. Or this could well be a copy after Holbein's original painting that employed the same drawing as a cartoon. Such drawings by Holbein were often used successive times to make replicas, and this, of course, was necessary at the court of Henry VIII, where images of this elite group of society were required for their various relatives and country homes. From two artists who worked in Augsburg in the early 16th century come these quite different portrait renderings that are in the exhibition. The Hans Schwarz portrait of Simon von Liebenstein at the left is actually a study for a portrait medal, which accounts for its strict profile view and the concentration not on the character of the sitter, but mainly on the specific traits of his physiognomy. The Hans Schäuflein red chalk drawing of the man at the right, on the other hand, is a more naturally composed three-quarter view that stresses the realism of the face and shows a far greater attempt at describing the inner psychology of the person. There may have been a preliminary sketch on paper by Ulrich Abt for this double portrait of the Augsburg merchant Lorenz Krafter and his wife Onesta Merz. However, the lifelike rendering in the underdrawing of the painting suggests that Abt may have bypassed this step and made his preparatory drawing directly on the grounded panel. What was directly observed and recorded by the draftsman in the underdrawing, here below of the two, which gives, I think, more of a hint of the psychological engagement of the two, for better or worse. I'm not sure how happily married they are. It was somewhat lost in the painting. Krafter was 52 and his wife only 35 when this double portrait was painted. And I think the strength of character and the strong individuality expressed in the underdrawing becomes somewhat muted here in the more generalized treatment of the portraits in the painted rendition. Even the woman's facial features are somewhat changed. Her nose, for example, this rather prominent bulbous shape of the tip of her nose is changed to this smaller, more sharply delineated version in the painting. Compositional sketches by artists often were made as stock material to be used later for various purposes, or alternatively to provide an exact plan for a specific commission. The drawings exhibition includes a number of examples of compositional drafts. Some, like this one by Dürer of the Holy Family out of doors, is only one of many sketches that the artist made of this subject, and later on referred to when making prints or paintings of this very popular theme. The Altdorfer, Emperor Maxentius ordering the burning of the 50 wise men, at the right, is, of course, a more obscure subject, and no doubt a special commission. It was made in preparation for a stained glass window, and this becomes clear from noticing the round shape of the drawing and also the broad use of wash. Just as in drawings on paper, many of the underdrawings on panels are compositional sketches, as in this case of this charming Annunciation by an anonymous Upper Rhenish master. Tiny as it is, and it's only 6.5 by 4 inches, blows up well on a screen, I think. It is filled with an abundance of detail from everyday life that in fact mimics early Netherlandish painting at the time, around 1440, particularly the style of the well-known master of Flémal, or Robert Campin. Looking closely and comparing the two, we come to feel almost as if we are sitting next to the artist as he makes his underdrawing, effecting little changes here and there, and deciding from the drawing to the painted layers to alter certain details, such as the angle of Gabriel's wings. Here you see them folded down, and then in the painting he decides to unfurl them. Or the Virgin's draperies in the drawing spilling out over the base of the bench, and here it's more tightly pulled together. Or even some other details, you have to look closely here, where there was a small window originally designed above here, or a smaller one here, before this became an open double arched entryway rather than simply a flat wall, or this design here in the bench of the Virgin that was in fact not painted. Looking really closely, we can see that one of the more important adjustments was the shift of the direction of the Virgin's glance, that initially was directed out at the viewer, and on second thought of the painter was shifted toward the arrival of Gabriel on the scene. So here she has too many eyes. On the first design, one left eye here, right eye down, right here, looking out at the viewer. And then the artist shifted it so that she would be looking over at Gabriel. Here you see the painted eye, which is the lower one here, with the iris and pupil at the far left. Sometimes we might even prefer the preliminary compositional drafts on the panel to the final painting for the anecdotal details that were initially included. In the Christ Before Pilate, Ludwig Schongauer originally drew a dog in the lower left-hand corner, but he eliminated it in this detail in the painting, probably to ensure greater emphasis on the important dramatic theme of Christ before Pilate. He also planned, you can see it back here, an arched opening in the wall with a mountain viewed through it, which he then eliminated here just to show the plain gray wall with a view out to a landscape beyond in an open window. There are distinctive characteristics of German paintings and their underdrawings that have much to do with the predominant aesthetic of printmaking in the early 16th century, and in particular, the influence of Albrecht Dürer, who was the most famous and innovative printmaker of his day. This is best exemplified in one of Dürer's important pupils, Hans Baldung Green, who worked in Dürer's Nuremberg studio between 1503 and 7. Here we see his St. John on Patmos of around 1510 to 11, that is, after he left Dürer's studio and went on to work on his own. Characteristic of Baldung's individual style are the vivid, almost strident hues that boldly contrast with each other. The dramatic lighting in his paintings is associated with Baldung's contemporary work as a designer of stained glass and also a creator of chiaroscuro woodcuts. Coming from his training in Dürer's workshop is Baldung's strongly graphic approach. And the underdrawing of the painting, which is over here, I'll show you details, further underscores Baldung's approach with its bold delineation of form and its prominent even parallel and cross-hatching for the modeling of forms. The precision of the execution of the underdrawing approximates Baldung's work in his drawings and woodcuts. In both the drawing you see at the right from Leiden, the Virgin and Child, and the underdrawing in the Metropolitan painting, Baldung employs a sparer linear system that contrasts broadly unarticulated areas with concentrated passages of dense parallel and cross-hatching for shading. And here are details of the similar penwork in each. The technique of introducing a kind of overdrawing in the uppermost paint layer is a feature of early 16th century German painting. The visual effect here is quite similar to contemporary chiaroscuro woodcuts, where independent line and color blocks were superimposed. Aside from its form-defining function, this overdrawing is a deliberate reference to a graphic convention borrowed from printmaking. Its use in paintings may reflect a desire by the artist to appeal then to the prevailing aesthetic. And here you can see Baldung's parallel hatching in dark paint over the lighter adjacent blue at the edges of the folds. And I'm referring to these parallel hatches in the dark tone. You can see it up here again as well. And it's something I think you can enjoy seeing in a number of the early 16th century German paintings on view in our galleries. I'd like now to turn to the extraordinary example of Albrecht Dürer's Salvator Mundi, which I mentioned hangs in the German Drawings exhibition precisely because it may be appreciated as much for its drawing, that is to say, its underdrawing, as for its painting. It offers a particular opportunity to delve more deeply into the relationship of an artist's drawings and underdrawings. A distinctive feature of this painting, of course, is its unfinished state, which was already recorded in the 16th century. The 1573 inventory of Willibald Imhoff, his collection, lists, and I quote, "Der Salvator, so Albrecht Dürer nicht gar ausgemacht hat," the Salvator not quite finished by Albrecht Dürer. The completed portions comprise the draperies, most of the hair, and the green background, but the face, hands, and orb have been left incomplete, with the underdrawing highly visible. And here I'm showing you some very much enlarged details so that you can see the refinement of this very, very meticulous underdrawing in the areas of the head and the hands. Infrared reflectography reveals the extraordinarily finished appearance of the underdrawing also in the draperies. In other words, this kind of very, very complete and fully worked up underdrawing underlies all areas of the painting. This type of underdrawing has a direct parallel to Dürer's drawings on paper of the period, in which he had taken over the exacting technique that he had developed in printmaking, especially for engraving. The extremely dense passages of parallel hatching and cross-hatching in pen in the shadow areas of Christ's head are even further reworked with another layer of curved strokes with brush down in this area in the cavity of the neck. One may compare the structure of these strokes with that in Dürer's drawing, the portrait of a young man from the Clark Art Institute of 1503, and also with the head of a curly-haired boy of 1508 that is from the Gaythorne Hardy collection, to find a similar approach and handling. The astonishing level of finish elsewhere in the underdrawing is paralleled in some of Dürer's preparatory studies for his first major commission in Venice, the Feast of the Rose Garlands, which is now in Prague, and also Christ Among the Doctors, which is in Madrid in the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection. In particular, Dürer's drawings for hands in Vienna and Nuremberg, such as the one at the right for the young Christ and Christ Among the Doctors, are very close in the details of their execution to the underdrawing of the hand of Christ raised in blessing in the Salvator Mundi. Here, the obliquely angled cross-hatching, and I'm referring to these areas here, for the deepest areas of shadow and the short comma-like strokes indicating the edges of forms and the bold, even parallel strokes across the fingers show the same artist at work. In the preparatory drawings for the draperies, Dürer employed penwork in darker and lighter inks and white heightening on blue paper that is paralleled in the rhythm of the pen strokes used to create the volumes of forms in Christ's draperies in the Salvator Mundi at the right. Here, the white areas of the underdrawing show the absence of penwork for the valleys of folds, while in the drawing, the addition of white heightening, for example here, establishes the peaks of folds. But in both in the underdrawing and the drawing on paper, Dürer achieved a remarkable variety in surface textures modeled by light and shade. What is so significant about the Salvator Mundi is not just its unfinished state, but that the underdrawing is brought to such a level of finish and refinement which is rare in Dürer's work. One of the few paintings worked up in a similarly detailed and meticulous way is Dürer's self-portrait of 1500 in Munich in the Alte Pinakothek, often referred to as the self-portrait as Christ. Here are some side-by-side comparisons that show the equally detailed underdrawings in both paintings in the heads and the hands. And here, I think you can see this extremely fine parallel and cross-hatching in the modeling of the underdrawing of the head of Christ, and also quite similarly the hand. The full-face frontal figure was a form usually reserved in Northern Europe at this time for icons of Christ. In addition, the idealized formal portrait of the sitter who directly addresses the viewer with a hypnotic gaze, with handsome face and shoulder-length brown hair, call to mind the description of Christ's true appearance as found in the famous Lentulus letter, a document thought to come from Publius Lentulus, a senator of Roman times, and only later found to be a forgery. Scholars' explanations of the Christ-like self-portrait in Munich include Dürer's intention in a devotional mode to imitate or emulate Christ. After all, he also produced a drawing self-portrait as a man of sorrows, as well as an engraving of 1513, where his own features are those of the suffering Christ on Veronica's veil. The Christ-like nature of the self-portrait in Munich has also been ascribed to Dürer's desire to convey a representation both of man created in the image of God and of the artist himself as creator. The Latin inscription, you see it up here on the painting, stresses his humanist identity, calling to mind the idea of the Christian humanist so strongly advocated at the time by Erasmus. The Munich self-portrait probably was meant as a showpiece that Dürer used to demonstrate to prospective clients and his students alike his extraordinary abilities. Dürer was not only a great artist, but also a very clever entrepreneur. He realized that it was possible to charge a higher price for his paintings if his patrons would come to appreciate and understand the time-consuming and exacting work that went into each painting. He explained his method of painting in a famous series of letters written to his patron, the Nuremberg merchant Jakob Heller. These letters provide even better evidence of the sequence of the painter's activity than the skills described even in Cennino Cennini's Renaissance Manual of Painting. Although Dürer was likely overstating the case, attempting to excuse delays perhaps or exact a higher price for the painting, he nonetheless detailed more than 8 steps in this process. It is believed that the Munich self-portrait as Christ was kept in Dürer's house during his lifetime, just as the Salvator Mundi was, kept until after Dürer's death, and in fact went directly into a collection in Nuremberg from his studio. Could then the Salvator Mundi, which has so many points of comparison with the Munich self-portrait, have served a similar purpose in Dürer's workshop, that is both to inspire and to instruct? The extraordinary attention he lavished on every stage of workmanship, from the underdrawing up to the final touches in the finished areas, certainly doesn't speak logically for a commissioned work with any kind of a deadline. Rather, the Salvator Mundi more likely was a painting that Dürer kept close at hand to work on as a further development, perhaps, of the concepts and aims of the Munich self-portrait. We can only guess what it might have looked like when completed. One scholar who noted the particular similarities between the Munich self-portrait and the Salvator Mundi even speculated that Dürer left the Salvator unfinished precisely because the finished painting of Christ would have looked more and more like Dürer himself. Whatever Dürer's reasons for leaving the Salvator Mundi unfinished, it dazzles the viewer today as much as it probably did in its own time. It is not only a painting, but most certainly reveals a master underdrawing. Thank you.